To start off with a little introduction about nuclear energy, it's essentially an attractive source of energy because it creates no emissions, and that can't be said for other energy sources that are currently used to produce electricity. The current U.S. share of total electricity generation that is nuclear is 18.2%, so that's 18.2% of all energy that we produce is through nuclear energy. And the world uses around 62,000 tons of uranium, and 28% of that is used by the US. So it's a pretty large portion. And nuclear energy is a more land efficient source because per unit of electricity, nuclear energy needs 50 times less land compared to coal and other sources of energy. Here we have a few photos of different types of nuclear reactors. The first two are light water reactors. They have high neutral absorption rates. They're technically safer, and they require enriched uranium, whereas the last photo is a heavy water reactor. It has lower neutron absorption and requires only regular uranium. The first two photos, one is a pressure water reactor, and the second is a boiling water reactor. For the pressure water reactor, there are two circuits, and that water that goes into the primary circuit is prevented from boiling because of the pressurizing of the reactor, whereas in the second one, there is only one circuit and water is held at a pressure that allows it to boil. And in the heavy reactor, it uses heavy water, so that is a chemically different form of water to control the nuclear reactions. Generally, people are against the use of nuclear power because of a few reasons. Firstly, it is quite expensive, and construction can cost billions of dollars and also take up to 10 years. And a lot of nuclear power plants emit huge amounts of radioactive waste, and this problem is unavoidable. This waste has to be securely stored because it has the potential to pollute the environment, and so it can be very dangerous. And a lot of extra work is put into that specifically. Other issues involve safety. There have been a lot of disasters with nuclear power plants in the past. There's limited fuel supply because you do have to mine uranium. It is not like infinite supply renewable energy sources. And it also, can have a pretty bad impact on the environment. Another issue with nuclear power plants is that there are many limitations in areas with large bodies of water. While nuclear energy seems to have many upsides, it can use up to 1 billion gallons of water per day, and nuclear power plants need this water for cooling. And when they're near lakes and rivers that normally supply this cool water, they're feeding off of that water.
It is important to note that some of this water is eventually returned. There are two general ways through which water can be returned to sources from nuclear power plants. The first is when it is directly returned to the rivers and lakes that it is taken from. This has some ecological downsides because it can be potentially raising the temperature of the water it is returned to. The second is when the water is cooled down by a different set of water, and the internal tank is then recycled for later nuclear processing. This has a lower water count than the first option. This interacts with the idea of nuclear limits because the temperature of water relates to both global warming and power plants, and there are limits to the temperature that the water can be in order to successfully cool a nuclear power plant, and to the temperature that a nuclear power plant can raise a body of water to after the water is expelled.
But as global warming is becoming more prevalent in society today, these lakes and rivers, their water in them is becoming warmer, and these plants can't properly generate and run the risk of shutting down. And so there is also a potential here that we will run out of water that is cool enough to power these plants, in addition to water needed for other industries like agriculture and for society in general. Furthermore, when heated water from power plants is released into aquatic ecosystems, it can dissolve oxygen levels and increase pH levels in the water. And so when there are nuclear power plants that are very near large bodies of water, it can have really negative effects on aquatic ecosystems and the animals living in these bodies of water. A lot of cold-blooded aquatic animals will suffer from malnutrition, and the environment can become inhospitable to many species living in these bodies of waters. They can die, and essentially the nuclear power plants can change the entire biodiversity of these ecosystems. Additionally, there are large amounts of pollution that come from nuclear power plants that can have lasting effects on these species as well. And these are a few of the, considerations that people take in discussing the political aspects of global warming and transitioning to nuclear energy to stop emissions of greenhouse gases. Nuclear energy has been factored into different Go Green initiatives. In the U.S., we have the Green New Deal plan, which outlines principles of a plan to achieve net zero greenhouse gas emissions and by 2030. And a lot of that involves investment in nuclear energy technologies to create a combination of nuclear energy and renewables to fight global warming. And we also see a lot of transition towards nuclear power in Europe. The European Union has proposed to include nuclear power and natural gas as a group of important energy sources to reduce greenhouse gases. One country that is specifically strongly for nuclear power is France. And Macron, the president of France, has been trying to push nuclear power on all of the European Union. And historically, 70% of their power comes from nuclear reactors. And he was quoted saying, "What our country needs, and the conditions are there, is the rebirth of France's nuclear industry." And his prime minister has put that on the entire European Union by also stating that in the long term, we need a commitment to climate change as well as transitioning to nuclear energy. And she says, "The reduction in energy consumption must be part of the long term. It is not a matter of principle or ideology. It is about the ecological transition. Our sovereignty is at stake. It is about our purchasing power." On the opposing side, Belgium, Germany, Switzerland, and Austria want to phase out their use of nuclear energy following the Fukushima disaster, and they believe that moving to nuclear energy is too expensive and that it should not be on the same level footing as renewable sources should be in combating climate change. There are also major concerns over radioactive waste, and specifically an Austrian scientist and environmental activist has said it is very concerning the genetic effects and long-term effects of radioactive waste, and has advised many of these countries to stand against the move to more nuclear energy in the future.
Now that we've learned a little bit more about the potential and limitations of nuclear energy and about the way nuclear energy has been factored into Western political development, we turn to whether the politics of nuclear energy make it a sustainable or unsustainable solution for solving climate change. Specifically, we're looking at the Iran nuclear deal, also called the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, as a case study. But what is the JCPOA? It's a landmark agreement signed in 2015 that puts strict curbs on Iran's nuclear program in exchange for loosening economic sanctions. The deal was dropped by President Trump in 2018, who was skeptical of the solvency of the JCPOA and instituted harsher sanctions that currently remain in place. The failure of this deal is largely credited to negotiations to renew it. President Biden has maintained restoring the JCPOA is not an administration priority in light of Iran's arms sales to Russia. But how does the JCPOA work, and what does this have to do with nuclear energy? The JCPOA is at its core a quid pro quo deal that enforced nuclear restrictions on Iran. Iran agreed not to produce either the highly enriched uranium or plutonium that could be used in a nuclear weapon. This relates to nuclear energy because the same systems that govern nuclear proliferation also track the development of nuclear energy. Nuclear energy and weapons are often lumped together in discussions of international relations as nuclear programs, and the development of nuclear programs necessitate the mining of uranium. That raises international red flags about the intention of a state to proliferate or cause conflict. What were the goals of the JCPOA? To unwind and slow down the potential of the Iranian weapons program. Nuclear energy is seen as the peaceful route for existing uranium resources, but the development of any nuclear program in certain regions is a topic of concern for Western powers, as they could then rise to the level of a conflict magnifier. What is enrichment? Uranium is an element used both in the production of nuclear power and nuclear weapons, but when uranium is enriched, it can be used to create nuclear weapons. Uranium can become enriched when, by increasing the content of its most fissile isotopes, U-235, through the use of centrifuges, machines which spin at supersonic speeds. Low enriched uranium, which typically has a 3 to 5% concentration of all U-235, can be used to produce fuel for commercial nuclear power plants, while high enriched uranium has a purity of 20% or more and is used in research reactors. Weapons-grade uranium is 90% enriched or more. There are a few planks of the JCPOA that relate directly to nuclear energy. First is nuclear restrictions. The JCPOA limits the numbers and types of centrifuges that Iran can operate, the level of its enrichment, as well as the size of its stockpiling of enriched uranium. The second is monitoring and verification. Iran agreed to implement a protocol that would allow inspectors from the International Atomic Energy Agency, the IAEA, to access its nuclear facilities and potentially to undeclared sites. This body also oversees the transfer of nuclear-related or dual-use materials. The IAEA is headquartered in Vienna and, with 126 member states, is the peak international organization for the peaceful uses of nuclear energy and technology. High levels of existing coordination and cooperation among international actors should make nuclear energy the prime theater to solving other high cooperation level issues like climate change. Why isn't it like that? Well, lessons from the failure of the JCPOA and possible limitations on the portability of nuclear energy reveal that nuclear energy and nuclear programs are seen as binding and potentially lethal methods of alliances in international relations. Western states are not the only ones using nuclear energy as a means to form alliances or communicate deterrence capabilities. For example, in August 1992, an agreement between the Iranian and Russian governments on building a 2-unit nuclear power plant was signed in Moscow. This covered both the construction and operation of the plant, as well as a joint organization called the Atomic Energy Organization of Iran, that insisted that the project would make use of full structures and equipment already at their Bashir plant. The nuclear power industry is subject to various arrangements for cooperation among utilities and internationally among government and United Nations nuclear agencies. The Euratom Treaty, for example, provided a stable nuclear framework that encouraged the growth and development of the nuclear industry while enhancing the security of the fuel supply for it and nuclear plant safety. It covers all civil nuclear activities in the European Union and aims to provide a common market in nuclear materials to ensure fuel supplies and to guarantee that nuclear materials are not diverted from their intended purpose. 15 countries in Central and South America cooperate under the Regional Cooperative Arrangement for the Promotion of Nuclear Science and Technology in Latin America, or the ARCAL, in activities related to the use of research reactors and nuclear techniques in agriculture and food irrigation. In Japan, South Korea, and China, these nations have agreed to form a network to cooperate on nuclear safety and quickly exchange information in nuclear emergencies. At a meeting of nuclear regulators and other experts in Guangdong in December 2013, a framework was agreed upon despite high regional tensions in this area. All of this cooperation indicates that nuclear energy is as much an international security issue as it is a domestic resource issue. The aforementioned treaties indicate that it is possible to establish a nuclear energy source without pursuing nuclear proliferation or risking the cross-contamination or theft of uranium. In terms of the potential of nuclear energy to dent climate change, it is much easier for states to expand cooperation on areas with existing treaties and subsidies. This means that in spite of domestic feet-dragging, the trends on nuclear energy for future cooperation are promising. The main lesson to learn from our case study of the JCPOA is that nuclear energy going forward should be the object of cooperation, not the byproduct of a deal seeking to contain something else, if we want the green energy factor to succeed.